Some debates get loud, but this one gets sharp. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. What you're about to see is exactly why composure matters. Tyler Cohen walks into a heated exchange and doesn't raise his voice, doesn't get flustered. He stays calm and lets the logic do the heavy lifting. Because here's the thing. When someone comes in with strong claims, it's easy to match that energy. But instead, he slows it down, answers clearly, and then starts pulling apart the argument piece by piece. And that's where it flips. What starts as a confident challenge quickly turns into a situation where the questions become harder to answer, and the narrative begins to fall apart.
The question, which would be, why was it okay for Democrats to fund ICE under Biden and Obama, but now it's a problem under Trump?
That's a great question. It's because ICE can't stop shooting and killing Americans in the streets. They did it to Renee Good, they did it to Alex Preddy, and so Democrats wanted some...
after that.
Well, they stopped, thank God they stopped after that. But I think two is probably enough. Yeah. And so Democrats were asking for some very common sense conditions to be met, which include no masks, pretty reasonable.
No masks from the party who wanted to tell everybody for years in this country they had to do nothing but wear masks during COVID, to be clear.
This is law enforcement.
Why are they having to wear masks?
Why are they having to wear masks right now? Because they don't want to be identified for
because they don't want to be doxxed by Democrat lawmakers.
There is no other law enforcement agent.
ICE, they can't carry out their mission.
There is no other law enforcement agent.
These are real people who are worried about going home to their families, and they're doing a job which is to enforce the laws of our country that are on the books.
Well, if they were doing those laws properly, the way any other law enforcement agency has for the last 250 years, they wouldn't need to cover their faces, but they're not. They're killing people on the streets, and we've seen numerous instances of that.
I'm glad you bring up killing people on the streets. So what would you say to the family of Sheridan Gorman, who was killed last week by an illegal immigrant who entered our country in 2023 and had a detainer out and an arrest warrant that wasn't fulfilled? What would you say to her family as to why it's okay to not fund ICE, whose job it would be to make sure that, one, he was never here, and two, that we've gotten rid of him? What would you say to her family?
Look, I'm sad for anybody who passes away or who is tragically killed. We have had ICE, we've had immigration enforcement in this country for years and years and years, and they've managed to do it without slaughtering people in the streets. And so I think that if we don't have an agency,
you're going to tell her family?
If we don't have an agency,
you're going to look in the eyes of her grieving parents.
But Caroline, which of the demands, the idea of the no masks, the warrant, what is your problem with? Let's start with the masks. I mean, why should police don't wear masks?
Well, the problem is that, again, this is why I asked you originally, why was it okay under Obama, why was it okay under Biden to carry out these deportations with zero fanfare? And now what has happened is
it not more, but it's not more aggressive in the streets, especially, and maybe it'll change now with Mark Wayne Mullen and no Chad Bavino, but there was an aggressive in-your-face push in cities like Los Angeles and Minneapolis that we did not see quite the visible in-your-face push under the Biden administration. You'll admit that, right?
Why did we have to be so aggressive? And part of it is because when you look at the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, what makes me so sad is the rhetoric from Democrats turned these people into non-law-abiding citizens who weren't protesting. They were obstructing
are you
ICE
saying that
operations.
Alex Preddy was not a law-abiding citizen?
No, absolutely not.
He was holding his phone.
And he also kicked a federal vehicle in the back, which is damaging federal property.
11 days earlier.
Damaging federal property. That's a felony. That's felony. You asked me if it was criminal behavior. That's a felony.
Somebody should not be killed for that, right?
But of course not.
Yeah.
But he was obstructing law enforcement operations because he and Renee Good existed in this ecosystem that told them this is a virtuous thing to show up and obstruct basic law enforcement operations, where all ICE is doing is enforcing the current laws that are on the books, 3 U.S. Code 1825. If you don't like the laws that are on the books, change them, but that would require winning elections, which Democrats didn't do. You can't now obstruct the enforcement of the laws that are on the books. That's overthrowing democracy. That's undermining the will of the American people.
We've got this weird situation now where ICE actually is funded for a long time because of the big beautiful bill. But what's not being funded is TSA, right? And the Coast Guard and other parts of Homeland Security.
It's all by design. Again, the Democrats were putting forward these bills. It was Trump himself unilaterally who decided that he didn't want this stuff funded because he wanted to exploit the pain that Americans were feeling at the airports. And so he told them, no, because we're not going to do anything until we can get the Save America Act passed. And if that means that we don't fund TSA, then let's not fund TSA. So can you at least admit that we had a solution here right in front of us, that the Democrats and Republicans both conceded that there was a solution and that Donald Trump unilaterally wanted to leverage that pain to get what he wanted politically?
Well, let me just on TSA really quick. I'm okay with some of the TSA agents walking off the job because every time I'm at an airport, I usually see like 7 TSA agents standing around and one of them doing the job. So I'm actually okay with that. But on the fact of leveraging pain, let's talk about the pain again of Sheridan Gorman, who just last week in our country, I just want everybody to picture this. She is an 18-year-old woman who is out watching the Northern Lights with her friends, taking selfies, thinking about what she's going to post on social media, and instantly a bullet rings out, hits her head. She's killed instantly by an illegal immigrant who should have never been here in the first place. Again, came in 2023. ICE's whole job is to get people like that out of our country. It is not morally defensible to defend a nation that allows criminals like that to stay in our country.
ICE is funded.
That's not morally...
But ICE is funded.
ICE is not funded. If
ICE is funded through the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Well, it needs to be funded beyond that, which is
Well,
the
but
whole
how does that
point
answer the
original
example you just
shutdown,
gave?
which is Democrats wanting to circumvent the fact
Donald
that
Trump,
they didn't win an
but
election
Donald
and they
Trump,
couldn't change the law.
Donald Trump is the president. It's his DHS. It's his ICE. Republicans have full control of government, House, Senate, White House. So why are you giving fear porn examples of the failings of this government when your party is in charge?
Okay, so
but don't you agree that ICE is itself important, and the idea of taking out criminal illegal aliens that have convicted of other crimes is a good thing?
I think the idea of immigration enforcement is important. I think that ICE, as it stands right now, is beyond repair. I think that this agency is fundamentally broken.
Who's supposed to do the job that she's just talked about?
Who's supposed to save Sheridan Gorman?
I think that
it's a good thing that we allowed her killer to stay in our country. It's a good thing that she's dead. When we talk about exploiting pain, it's a good thing that she's dead.
At a bare minimum.
Yes or no?
At a bare minimum,
she would not be dead.
Let's go one at a time.
At a bare minimum, they need these conditions put in place, which include having insignia or being able to identify yourself, not wearing masks, having warrants signed by judges, and no ICE at the polls come November. I think those are all pretty reasonable conditions.
And what about the pain of Sheridan Gorman's family?
Again, I answered that question. It's tragic when anybody gets killed.
And just want to follow up on something you said. I mean, for the TSA agents who are hardworking people who are going without pay now for a month, I mean, how is that okay? Why is that good? I mean, I know you just sort of like laughed at that some of them are standing around, but these are people who have jobs, who are dependent on this money, and they're going to work every day and not getting paid.
Yes, and that's why I wish Congress as a whole, and you mentioned my party, and I will knock my party in this, Republicans control both chambers of Congress. And the one thing I will give Democrats is Democrats are excellent politically at sticking together when it comes to votes. Republicans have never figured that out, both under the first Trump administration and under this Trump administration. They do not have the grit and the toughness that President Trump has in terms of forcing through an agenda. I will give that to Democrats because Republicans right now could force this through and could force a situation where you don't have to go up against this kind of opposition with Democrats. It's nonsense. They need to learn to wield power better.
Get rid of the filibuster?
Yes, and President Trump has said that, and I support that.
You know what? I support it too. I think this is a rare moment of compromise because Republicans have been using the filibuster as a tool to prevent any meaningful legislation from getting passed. It is inherently anti-democratic, and so I would absolutely be in favor of nuking the filibuster.
And this is where the bigger picture really comes into focus, because what we just watched wasn't just a debate. It was a clear example of how narratives get used, and sometimes selectively applied. Throughout that exchange between Brian, Tyler Cohen, and Caroline Sunshine, there was a noticeable pattern. Certain tragedies were brought up repeatedly to support a political argument. And of course, any loss of life is tragic. That's not in question. But here's the issue. When one situation is used over and over again to drive a point, while other situations don't get the same attention, it starts to feel selective. It raises a bigger question. Is the concern consistent? Or is it being applied only when it supports a specific narrative? And that's where the argument begins to weaken. Because instead of addressing the full scope of the issue, the conversation gets narrowed down to a single example. It becomes less about policy and more about emotion. And again, emotion matters, but it can't replace consistency. What stands out here is how Brian handles it. He doesn't dismiss the tragedy. He doesn't ignore it. But he also doesn't let the conversation get pulled off track. He brings it back to the broader discussion. What's actually being proposed, what the policy implications are, and whether the reasoning holds up across the board. And that's the key difference, because it's easy to focus on one example. It's much harder to maintain a position that stays consistent, no matter the situation. You also saw moments where the discussion shifted, bringing in comparisons that sounded strong, but didn't directly address the question. That's another common tactic. Redirect instead of respond. But when the conversation is slowed down, those shifts become obvious. And that's why composure wins here. By the end of this exchange, it's not really about who won the debate. It's about which argument stayed consistent, and which one struggled when pushed to go deeper. And once you notice that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Let me know what you think in the comments.